When it comes to Oddworld, there have been quite a few popular ideas that have sprung up among the fan base that have been taken as fact even if they're not. This can be for many reasons, often understandably, as is especially the case, I'd argue, when it comes to content that hasn't been released. It's quite easy among the drought of details regarding revealed yet unmade projects for false facts surrounding such projects to emerge and be taken as popular truth, in part likely due to a lack of alternative information. Considering the Oddworld franchise has so many named but unreleased games, it's understandable that this has occurred on a few occasions for various reasons. And this is no different for Oddworld Squeak's Oddysee, the unreleased third game of the Oddworld Quintology. Being such a vital entry into the main story of Oddworld, yet having such little information confirmed about it, it's difficult to be certain what believed ideas on it are inaccurate, and naturally tons of it contrasts with each other. However, perhaps one of the most talked about and believed things regarding the game, or specifically who Squeak the main character is actually completely disproven as simply being a popular myth caused by a misunderstanding. This is the Brain Slurg myth that started about Squeak years ago, which is one of the many myths of Oddworld that became so popular to the point that many people believed it to be true, and actually from what I've seen still to this day it is still frequently taken as fact despite it being completely debunked. The rumour states that Squeak is a member of the lower portion of Oddworld's food chain that uses symbiosis. Now I think that part is actually true, at least the bit about him being the lowest of the food chain or whatever, and I've also personally always believed Squeak uses symbiosis as well, but in hindsight I might just think that because of the rumour, so I'm not entirely sure. But that part did always seem to fit right to me, because the Quintology heroes so far, Abe and Munch, have been among the lowest of the food chain, and have also had specific abilities that let them control stuff. Abe has his possession abilities, and Munch can control mechanical equipment with electricity, or however it is he does it. So it always made sense to me that Squeak would probably have similar abilities, like some kind of symbiosis. And actually, it turns out in 2000, Lorne Lanning basically confirmed this, saying, "Actually, most of our very first character designs were based on symbiosis relationships, but they were too hard for us to achieve in gameplay in the 32-bit era. We have a lot of creatures like this in our design library. Some of them are extremely cool. I'm sure they'll start showing up in some of the games coming right after Munch. In the long run, symbiosis creatures are important to the Oddworld Quintology. Squeak's Oddysee, Quintology number 3, is dependent upon it." So yeah, the part about Squeak using symbiosis seems legit. But the rumour then states that Squeak uses a form of symbiosis where he attaches something called a Brain Slurg onto a host's ear, which takes control of said host's body. Now I'm pretty sure this part about there being a Brain Slurg is confirmed to be false. And I didn't know this version about the myth actually. I've always thought I've heard people saying that Squeak himself is a Brain Slurg that attaches himself onto people's heads or something. Although maybe I'm misremembering. But either way, this idea actually apparently came about due to a joke made by Alf being taken seriously. In Dear Alf March 2012, Alf replied to a comment by user Sockbot who asked, "Hey Alf, I was curious. On some websites they said that Squeak used symbiosis. I was wondering what type of symbiosis that is. Does he possess people like Octegai, or use the help of creatures like Fuzzles to Munch?" To which Alf replied, "Squeak's Oddysee will use a special controller called a Brain Slurg. You insert the Brain Slurg in your ear and it takes over control of your body. It's immersive." So I think he was like taking the term Squeak to mean the game Squeak's Oddysee, as opposed to the character Squeak maybe, I don't know, but I can see how his comment could be somewhat confusing. Now supposedly he was specifically making a reference to the Brain Slugs from Futurama, which, to quote the Futurama wiki, are a species of space parasite that attaches its jelly-like body to a victim's head and takes control of their brain. I've just realised I could do Futurama lore videos. That would be fantastic. The interaction between Sockbot and Alf is far longer and goes on quite a bit, with Sockbot's probing Alf further about Squeak and the Brain Slurg, but to sum it up, Alf basically responds either with kind of dismissive or sarcastic comments. Another user the day after asked, is Squeak the Brain Slurg? And Alf said, Oddworld Squeak's Oddysee, free Squeak with every copy, hurry before we ship the creature to extinction. So you know, it's kind of arguably confusing jokey messages I guess, with Alf in the same thread saying, theories can be a lot of fun, it's good to think outside of the box, and then saying, if Squeak is a brain slug, the moon would probably just have a big splat shape on it where someone trod on him. Now Sockbot brings up a good point that kind of makes it more understandable for why Squeak being a brain slug would make sense, saying, when you say brain slug, is that a subspecies of slug, the slug creature in Abe's Exoddus? And it says on many websites that Squeak is on the bottom of the food chain, so are the slugs. And you know, to be fair, that's a good point, because as I mentioned earlier, I think that is something that's been said about Squeak, that he's the lowest on the food chain, or at least on the lower portion of it, and the slugs from Abe's Exoddus are also the lowest creature on the food chain. But Alf replied by saying, all our heroes are unlikely characters that tend to hang out at the bottom of the food chain. By that we don't mean they're plants or worms or anything, we mean it in a more economic sense. Abe and Munch are both used as resources by the industrial forces to further their capital gain. So even here Alf seems to be somewhat dismissing the brain slug theory, and as usual it's best not to take what Alf says too literally most of the time. In fact, on the same Dear Alf comment section, Sockbot also asked him what the names of the two Quintology heroes after Squeak are, to which Alf replied by saying, Alf and Alf Jr. Now seemingly this information ended up being held in such popular belief among the Oddworld fandom, the brain slug thing not the Alf and Alf Jr., to the point that apparently Alf's comments were taken so literally that a now deleted page on the Oddworld wiki was created about brain slugs. Now interestingly, in my research, I found posts from before the brain slug theory came about that show people actually theorising that Squeak may be a slug. Again, I think due to the lowest form of life on the food chain thing, but also because his name is Squeak, and that's the noise slugs make when they're stepped on. So it's kind of interesting that people were already kind of thinking this way before Alf even mentioned a brain slug. Overall, it's an inspired theory and an interesting bit of Oddworld fandom history, the effects of which are still felt to this day. In fact, this video was originally part of a whole video on Squeak's Oddysee itself. The Brain Slurg myth is such an arguably important, or rather at least often cited part of the Squeak's Oddysee mythology, it was inevitable to include it. It's still mentioned to this day. I've literally had people ask me, hey, can you do a video about Squeak's Oddysee and the Brain Slurgs? But when I recorded it, I felt I might as well make this part its own thing and keep the full Squeak video, which naturally will be coming out very soon, free of what is a confirmed false theory. But despite there being so little information regarding Squeak, we're at least quite sure, despite popular belief, that he isn't a member of a species known as the Brain Slurgs.
Hello, follow me. Yo.